Hey there, Pithy listeners. Today is the day that we finish the story of Eleanor of Aquitaine. Once the Queen of France, then the Queen of England. And just when you think things are smooth sailing, after all, the woman birthed 8 children in 12 years with her hunky king of a husband. Well, just wait and see. But before we begin, Erica, can you help us clean the castle?
With pleasure. The Pithy Chronicle is on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and all major platforms. Writing a review or giving us a rating is the best way for you to help us get found and continue to dish that historical hot goss. If you would like to support us with some cash money to keep us hot and keep us hydrated by buying us a coffee at buyusacoffee.com/The Pithy Chronicle. Now, if you're into long-term relationships, hit us up on Patreon for extra content and episodes delivered to your inbox. Now, back to the show.
You're listening to the Pithy Chronicle. History with a bite. I'm Caroline.
And I'm Erica, and we bring you history's dirtiest deeds, dripping with sarcasm.
Are you hungry yet? We last left Eleanor across the channel, re-established as the Duchess of her realm, Aquitaine, after she and Henry decided he needed help controlling the rebellious French parts of the kingdom, and she may or may not have needed a break from him. Was this an indication of a growing rift between them? Many historians say no. He was still a king and therefore free to do as he pleased, wink wink, nudge nudge, whatever. And though she was likely too old to have more children, she had given him 4 sons and 4 daughters.
Although the 4 sons would begin to cause problems very quickly. It's almost like she had too many.
3 too many. Although I guess it would really be 2 too many because, well, anyway, there's a lot of death and destruction coming. Let's do it.
Fantastic.
While Eleanor was exerting increasing autonomy over her duchy, Henry was shoring up marital alliances for his offspring and planning out the future of his enormous kingdom, dividing his domains between his sons. Henry and Louis VII, which is, remember folks, Eleanor's ex-husband, contrived a treaty of marriage, which would continue to plague both sides for decades.
Shocker. Prince Richard, son number 3, and Eleanor's favorite, was betrothed to Louis's daughter, Alice.
And just for that ick factor, this means Eleanor's son would marry the half-sister of Eleanor's daughters.
Ooh.
Just wanted to make sure we all got there.
Yeah.
Then there's Geoffrey, son number 2, and frankly, the least important historically, and he was betrothed to Constance of Brittany.
Joanna, daughter number 1, was soon sent to marry King William II of Sicily, and John, the youngest son, was betrothed to Alicia, eldest daughter of Hubert III, Count of Savoy. And oh my god, that doesn't happen. Let's just say that out front.
That does not work out at all.
No.
But what about Henry? Son number 1. Well, the Henrys, plural, had a very complicated father-son relationship.
I mean, one of them is just waiting for the other to die and to find their true purpose and power, not that we've seen this before.
As I said, it's complicated. And it really does make me think of the current royals and all their problems. It does feel that waiting for your parents' death can't be good for the relationship. But King Henry did decide to continue the tradition of crowning one's heir, which was kind of a French thing at the time. And despite sincere opposition from the church, he did just that, meaning Henry became known as the Young King. However, titles are cheap.
And I just feel like power, especially for Henry the Father, is just very hard to give up.
I mean, he fought really hard for it. He worked really hard to get that power, and he just doesn't want to let it go.
Yeah.
So old King Henry, which is not actually what they called him, because I think he probably would have murdered them for that, but older Henry, King Henry, wasn't ready to allow his boys their autonomy. They weren't ready, he decided, to rule. So their lands and rights were in name only, which led to some serious animosity.
Can't imagine why.
As for Eleanor, we really don't know how much communication she had with old King Henry, and all I can think is old King Cole. He was a Less than merry old soul. We don't know how much time they were chatting at this point. They didn't see a lot of each other, but there were letters that flowed back and forth. What we really have to look at this time in her life were her actions, and they frankly speak very loudly. Her still seething ex, Louis, also took full advantage of this. He befriended the young King Henry, who was now his son-in-law, after marrying Margaret of France. So that is the daughter of his mom's ex-husband and his second wife.
This is one messy marital family tree.
I think it grows back in on itself.
Ugh.
Some sort of loop-de-loop pretzel effect there. Yeah.
I'm surprised you don't love the Angevins more with all of this sideways incest.
You know what? That's valid.
Incest adjacent.
Louis invited his new son-in-law and his daughter, whom they called the Junior Queen of England, to join him in Paris, where he encouraged the former's ambitions. Young Henry wanted power, and he was willing to fight for it. Frustrated by his father's procrastination, Henry took matters into his own hands, escaping the custody of his father and traveling to Paris. Louis VII then took incredible glee, as you can well imagine, and announcing to old King Henry that he now stood behind the young king as the new and only ruling monarch.
And now we have the Revolt of 1173/4.
4. Took a little over a year.
Yeah.
What was Eleanor's role in all of this? Well, I'm so glad you asked. We aren't sure. Some historians lay a lot of the blame at her feet.
Oh, I'm shocked.
Yeah, right? 12th century historian William Newburgh says, quote, "The younger Henry, devising evil against his father from every side by the advice of the French king, went secretly into Aquitaine, where his two youthful brothers, Richard and Geoffrey, were living with their mother, and with her connivance, so it is said, he incited them to join him."
However, Roger Hoveden, another 12th century chronicler, claims that Eleanor sent her younger two sons to France in order to join their older brother against their father. And furthermore, he argues that Eleanor encouraged her vassals to support them in their efforts.
Yeah.
It's not flattering for her.
In the end, though, it's really just about actions. And in April of 1173, Eleanor went to Paris to join her sons.
Not a good look.
No.
Not a good look.
Especially when you're going to meet up with your ex-husband. And daughters whom you abandoned. Wish I was a fly on the wall for that situation.
I know, right?
Can you imagine?
No.
Oh, hi, I'm your mother.
Sorry, I left you.
Henry also was not happy with this look. Old Henry. And his cronies seized her on the road and took her to her husband. He was most displeased.
More than that, he was most scandalized. He didn't announce her arrest. Instead, people literally had no idea where she was.
Yeah.
A la Kate Middleton.
That's exactly what I thought. But her sons persisted. Louis VII assisted their endeavors, and from Paris, Eleanor's 3 eldest sons and her ex-husband plotted against the current one who was imprisoning her. What about John the youngest? Well, he stayed with his dad, which was leading to an inevitably close relationship between them. And we do think that John was probably the dad's favorite, mostly because he's the only one who never went into
Rebellion,
open martial revolt.
Yeah. Can't imagine how that connection got made.
Hostilities commenced. Louis and young Henry made the first move, although neither side really made any progress. There was a brief winter truce.
Oh, so thoughtful of them.
Always. And then in July of 1174, Old Henry, or King Henry as he would have preferred, faced an imminent invasion of England, and he packed up John, his favorite son, and Joanna, his daughter, and Eleanor, who was, imprisoned, and sailed to Southampton, where he kept Eleanor in an unknown, confined place. We don't know even now where she was.
At least she'd be used to this whole thing, considering her grandparents.
Oh my gosh, now I forgot about that. Yeah, that's true.
I know, right?
Her step-grandma's basically a
Just
captive,
another captive
right?
queen in a tower.
Until Henry II's death, 16 years later, Eleanor remained his prisoner, with varying degrees of freedom depending on the political situation at the time. We know very little about how she lived, but Henry did try, or consider, an annulment on the grounds of consanguinity.
An argument he could make, considering they were closer related than Eleanor and her ex, Louis, who did divorce for that exact reason. I mean, on paper, there was a lot more going on.
On paper.
On paper.
But it's still hard to argue because they got a very special dispensation from the Pope.
Papal bull, yeah.
Acknowledging you know, and we all know, but it's fine. But anyway, he didn't really want to do this because he had a better option, which was...
the nunnery.
Duh! You can push her out to take the veil at Fontevraud and then remarry and start over again. But she refused, and the papacy refused to force convict her into the convent.
Probably because the papal legates were like, you know what? She's just more work than she's worth.
You've got to know.
The Lord is happy where she is.
And they knew she'd never leave them alone.
No.
Eleanor refused to take the veil, but I do want to clarify that she was not in prison per se. She was under house arrest. It wasn't good, but it could have been worse.
Okay.
Henry II's bank accounts show that some years she was barely surviving. I mean, she was down to like one servant, Erica.
Listen.
How could she survive?
It's a lot on a servant. You got a clean chamber pot. You got a dresser.
Look at you, always thinking of the little man.
Fire's ready, cleaned out the fireplaces, chopped firewoods, cooked.
You know who I don't want cooking my food?
The person who handles my pot. I don't want it.
Exactly. So sometimes she was down to very basics, but at other times, particularly after 1177, and you'll see why in just a minute, she actually lived quite comfortably, surrounded by luxurious items and many more servants.
Oh, thank the Lord.
However, her relationship with her sons was terribly strained at this time, and she missed some pretty big moments in their life. First, her 11-year-old daughter was sent to marry William of Sicily.
Jesus.
11. Her youngest son, John, was given a new betrothed, Isabella of Gloucester, his cousin.
Wow.
She was 3.
Perfectly capable of consent.
Mm-hmm. Her also able to consent 9-year-old daughter, Eleanor, married King Alfonso VIII of Castile.
Oh, God.
And her second son, Geoffrey, married his betrothed, Constance of Brittany. And despite all of these familial celebrations...
I don't know that that's the word with, 3 and 11 and whatnot. These are birthday parties. Elaborate, but birthday parties.
All right, so at all of these events...
Oh, God.
Familial birthday parties / wedding events... Eleanor was rarely allowed to even communicate with her sons, especially her favorite and the heir to her duchy, Richard. However, there are some bright spots for her. In 1176 or 1177, Rosamund Clifford died. And Erica, would you please remind us who that was?
Oh, yes, she was the fair Rosamund. She was Henry's mistress who allegedly he built this hedge maze for her where they would meet clandestinely in the middle.
So romantic.
To keep her safe from Eleanor. Oh, the big bad wife. Until one day she absconds into the maze to meet with her paramour, but there is only Eleanor. She gives her poison and kills her. Oh my goodness.
Wow. You don't seem to believe it.
I mean, she's in jail. What's she gonna do?
Yeah, right. What is Eleanor gonna do?
She's in jail with one chamber pot maiden. She ain't doing nothing.
Oh my God.
The famous relationship started during Eleanor's pregnancy with the last kid, John, and her relationship with the king ended, and she retired to Godstow Abbey and died there at age 40. So not in the middle of a hedge maze and not poisoned by Eleanor.
But interestingly, she did retire to a nunnery, so she did exactly what Henry wanted her to do.
I guess good for her. She didn't have to go to jail, but she still went to a nunnery.
Despite absolutely no evidence of this, Eleanor would suffer centuries of accusations. Many seriously legit historians spouted legend that Eleanor had arranged for Rosamund's death. But honestly, if she was worried about Henry II sleeping around, although I'm not sure she was up for the task after he literally imprisoned her.
I don't know.
But she would probably be more concerned about his affair with the 16-year-old Alice of France.
That name seems really familiar. Can't imagine where I've heard it.
Alice is currently engaged to Eleanor's favorite kid, Richard.
His dad is sleeping with his future daughter-in-law. That is the Eskimo brothers to end all Eskimo brothers that I don't want.
No, you don't need your father as a brother in any form.
No.
Like the Energizer Bunny that he is, Alice Alice actually bore him several children.
Oh, heavens.
Henry continually delayed the marriage with Richard, and of course Richard is pissed and desperately trying to get out of this betrothal. However, that wasn't even the worst of Eleanor's imprisoned troubles. Confined because of her son's attempt to take power before the death of their father, most of the next 16 years were marked by warfare between her sons and her imprisoning husband. As in, the sons fought both each other and they fought Dad. Separately at times, then together. I mean, any which way you can think of it, the geometry always works out.
Wow.
In 1180, first husband, Louis VII, dies, leaving his throne to his son via a third wife, Philip II. Philip, brother-in-law to Henry the Younger, was even more involved than Dad to push Henry II out of power. He exploited the familial distrust and dysfunction, and he befriended Henry the Younger. They were besties. With Philip's troops and those of the brother Geoffrey, or Joffrey, depending on how you want to do it, young King Henry tried to ambush his father in 1183. It
didn't
go well. Henry the Younger fled and wandered around Aquitaine with no idea what to do next, which caused him to catch dysentery.
What?
He was literally just off wandering because he didn't want to go with his tail tucked between his legs to Dad and be like, yeah, I know that we've killed thousands of people in the attempt to give me the crown early, but like, I love you, Dad. Please don't hurt me. So, yep, he walked around and gave himself dysentery.
Well, I don't know if I believe this, but apparently Eleanor dreamed of his death, and 10 years later she told Pope Celestine III that she was forever tortured by Henry the Younger's demise. Which fair, he's your kid.
He's your kid. Of course that's going to torture you.
Yeah.
Henry, too, was pretty distraught about all of this. Upon hearing the news, he was overcome with remorse, and with haste, he sent his royal ring. Did he go himself? No. Did he send a doctor? No. He sent the ring, as in kiss it. Henry III, for his part, begged his father to show mercy on their mother from his deathbed, which is nice. And evidently he was quite touched that his dad sent a ring. But this would change the estranged couple's relationship. King Philip II claimed Norman holdings for his widowed sister Margaret, and that meant that Henry needed to get Eleanor's help. Together, they would battle this inheritance. They also were fighting the loss of a son together. I think it did kind of bond them in a new way.
They needed each other in a way that they hadn't ever before.
Tragedy unfortunately doubled when their son Geoffrey died in 1186. Their second son, Geoffrey, died either during a jousting tournament, being trampled to death, which sounds awful, or from an instant chest pain just after announcing another rebellious plot against his father.
Oh my, I know which one I want to believe.
Actually, it might be both. There's a thought that perhaps to avoid Henry II learning of their next attempted rebellion, Philip spread rumors of the jousting accident to give a reason for Geoffrey to have been dead in Paris. So they were planning one, but the tournament thing, it was
like a cover-up.
Yeah.
The couple was devastated, but Eleanor enjoyed greater, though still supervised, freedom at this point in time. I mean, 2 sons down, you got 2 left.
He had some spares, but they weren't legitimate. And it seems pretty wasteful to lose all the others first.
Yeah.
Eleanor even stayed with Henry and traveled with him often during this time, and she also began to advise him on governance once more. However, it wasn't really until Henry's death in 1189 that she was finally free.
Despite outliving 2 husbands, one of which was 12 years her junior, Eleanor would go on to survive Henry by 15 years.
Woman was a battle axe. She just wouldn't go. And we're going to see that because she was not going into retirement at this point.
No.
She had a lot of things to take care of. Henry might have outlived and regretted war with his first 2 sons, but he still fought against his third bitterly. Richard continued to fight against his father's zealous hold on power, and Philip II held a peace conference and publicly offered to settle with Henry.
What a snake in the grass.
Such a flippin' snake in the grass. It's just icky. He said that he would settle with Henry if Richard would just hurry up and marry Alice. Remember, That's Henry's mistress and the mother to many children with Henry, who is also Philip's sister and is engaged to Richard, the son.
Who did not want to marry her for obviously and breathtakingly disgusting reasons.
Oh, and also, Henry had to confirm that Richard was his heir. Henry refused. And while Richard didn't agree with the marriage bit, he did want to be publicly proclaimed heir. And so when Henry remained silent on both accounts, Richard switched sides, publicly giving formal homage to Philip as his king, due to the Normandy and Aquitaine relationship, which really pissed Henry off because he had refused to do so for decades. He was a king in his own right.
Yeah.
He doesn't need to be bowing to a different king. Likely due to the stress of this political and physical fighting between 3 of his 4 sons and himself, old Henry was suffering from a bleeding ulcer. I mean, it's kind of amazing he survived this much.
Yeah.
And that would soon prove fatal. Due to his weakened state, he didn't want to face the combined forces of Philip and Richard, and so he agreed to a peace. But considering Richard was going to inherit in the next 10 days, they didn't really accomplish much, except the humiliation of a dying man.
Wow.
It was brutal. But let's go back to Eleanor. Richard immediately ordered her release, only to discover that she was already free because her custodians had realized that the tides had just turned and they practically threw open the gates.
Get out of here.
She is released from prison, but widowhood did not mean retirement because as soon as she was freed, Eleanor rode to Westminster, receiving oaths of fealty on behalf of her son Richard, who briefly joined her, but then he had business to take care of. He had to go fight the Turks. Richard was a warrior spirit and he desperately just wanted battle. And so he was off to join the Crusades. You made a face, young lady. What are you thinking?
He's just not a very good warrior.
No, not at all. But he's so brave and courageous when he sends others to die in his name.
We always think of, Richard Coeur de Lion, the Lionheart, and he's just not very good at what he's remembered for.
It's like his spirit. He just wanted to be at war. There are some rumors that perhaps Richard might have swung one or both ways, and that he really enjoyed being around a lot of other guys and being with the bros. He would have done great in the Roman military where you weren't allowed to get married. But you're right, he was not actually very good. He did go on the Third Crusade, and he left Eleanor to watch over England, Normandy, and Aquitaine. P.S. It was a huge failure. He was gone 2 years due to the crusade, which he lost. And then 2 more after Henry VI, the Holy Roman Emperor at the time, captured him and held him in captivity. There is a ton of captivity with these families.
I'm telling you, it's their kink.
I can see that. Eleanor wasn't formally in charge during this time, but she did exercise a considerable degree of influence, and much of her time was devoted to Prince John. And I don't mean helping him and encouraging him and being his mother. No. She spent most of her time continually trying to prevent his usurpation of his brother's throne. Speaking of snakes in the grass, John was just like, is it my turn?
It's me.
Is it my turn? John was just a pain in the ass and a bit of a dick.
Yeah.
Eleanor, treating him like the baby that he was, kept sternly sending him into timeout. Eleanor was also busy raising the ransom for her son, Richard. The ransom was a measly amount, just 25,500 kilograms of silver. It's hard to do the number comparisons, but let's go 3.3 billion.
Oh my
today.
God.
It's an unthinkable, unfathomable, ungettable amount of money.
The deal also required 200 noble hostages, but no one talks that much about that or how pissed their parents were when Eleanor ripped them from their families.
They had to be under 15. All of your noble preteens. Richard was eventually freed, but he died just a few years later, leaving the throne to that scheming younger brother, John, whom we remember, Mummy, thumb-sucking at Robin Hood. It's a great movie. It is not accurate, but it's great. He then caused more grief to his poor, old, by this point,
properly old, yeah,
old mother. She lived well into John's reign, whom, despite his terrible behavior, she continued to support, working tirelessly to ensure his succession. She was very fair-minded. It is Henry's. Nope. It is Richard's. Nope. It is John's. And whoever's it was, she was gonna fight for them, which I have to say
good mom
is
move.
A very good mom move. She was also a pretty amazing traveler. Some 60 years after taking the cross herself and traveling to Jerusalem, Eleanor traveled to Castile, escorting her granddaughters for their future arranged marriages. She crossed the Pyrenees to retrieve them from her daughter Eleanor, who was the Queen of Castile, and then she went back across the mountains. However, she took ill, she cut the trip short, and she actually made her final journey to Fontevraud, where she found rest, not as a nun, as Henry kept trying to push her into, but a well-kept benefactor.
Yeah.
Queen of the nunnery castle. Despite continuing ailments, she actually left once more when her grandson, which is Geoffrey's kid, claimed the throne over her son John. She supported John over her grandson Arthur, despite the fact that she had actually raised Arthur, Geoffrey's son, alongside her dead son Richard, and she really didn't like John. So again, she was very fair. If you're alive, you get the crown. If you're dead, I'm moving on, I guess. Back to Fontevraud she went, and this time she did take the veil.
And ironically, upon her death, she was entombed next to her husband, Henry, as well as Richard and her daughter, Joan. So she got to bug him in the afterlife a bit.
And that is the life and legend and really incomplete chronicles of Eleanor of Aquitaine. She is one of the most famous people that we know very little about. And I know you're thinking this was a 4-parter, how could we possibly know very little about her? But we've told you a lot of background information, we've put in all of the main players because they all were so incest adjacent and kind of in each other's business. But knowing about her true intentions and feelings, all we have are her actions. We really don't know what it was that she was fighting for necessarily, because I think she kept it quite hidden to herself most of the time.
Yeah. I think it's pretty great the amount we have on her. I think it's wonderful, but there are so many things that I wish we knew more about.
She lived in a very tumultuous time. She lived a very outlandish lifestyle for the time. First of all, divorce. Second of all, going on crusade. Third of all, abandoning children. Fourth of all, birthing a whole brood.
Truly a brood.
She had power in her own name. No part of her life was non-dramatic.
Right.
We do have a ton of that. But what we don't have, I think, are her intentions.
Yes.
It's harder, I feel, to give her agency sometimes, because we tell everything about her in context to these men who were part of her situation. And the only thing that she supposedly did all on her own that historians have really given her credit for was this supposed murder of Rosamund Clifford, which was false.
Yep. I think it's a similar thing for Anne Boleyn.
Yeah.
Female characters, and I'm going to call them characters even though they were real people, because they're blank slates so that people can infer whatever the zeitgeist of the time is. And I'm talking about the modern time onto them.
Yep.
It's not fair to give modern intentions to historical figures, and that's why a lot of them tend to come off as caricatures through the lens of modernity.
That is a really hard part of being a historian in this day and age, where we are questioning so much. We do definitely want to make sure that we put our modern morality on life, but sometimes placing it on history is damaging.
Yeah. Going back to the Boleyn and Eleanor's comparison, they were, per history, such different thinkers, such outliers of the time. And I think that's why they capture so much fascination.
Men didn't know what to make of them. And I mean men of their time. And I also mean much more modern historians who were, up until the last century, definitely men. And even now, it is a significantly male-dominated field. With that, you have to remember that they're putting their own interpretations of her actions. And I think we do too. It's hard not to as a historian. It's very tempting to feel like you understand them. But I wish we had some of her own words.
Writings, yeah. We do have some correspondence, but it's not journal.
No, there's no Queen Victoria journal
Bears
going on
herself.
Here.
Yes.
God, that'd be amazing.
No. Well, think about all the ones that they burned of Victoria's.
That haunts me at night.
It does.
That's all
it
I can
keeps
think
me
about.
up at night.
What did she say?
Because you know it had to be spicy.
You know she described the sex scenes. Girl had a drive.
Or how she disliked certain children, even though some of that still survives, but you know she got into it.
Yeah, she was not a fair mom.
No.
Very much the opposite of Eleanor here. She did not support the one that was next in line. She just did whatever she damn well pleased. And with that, I'm Caroline.
And I'm Erica, and we are pithily yours.
This episode is brought to you by the Pithy Chronicle, LLC. The Pithy Chronicle is intended for education, entertainment, and non-commercial purposes. Any views or opinions expressed in this podcast are personal and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the owner may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity. While we offer lots of sarcasm, this podcast does not offer any advice or services. Listening to this podcast may induce fits of laughter, unexpected distraction, or uncontrollable rage at the subjects, hopefully not at us. We hope you learned something today. If not, so sorry. Please be advised we are not experts in the following fields: medical, legal, financial, technological, thermonuclear engineering, submarine warfare, neuroscience, or cat husbandry. Thanks for listening to our little disclaimer. Just covering our history-loving asses. Bye!